Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today we're doing Mythbusters, and the co-host today is Chris Rossini, and he is the editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. And I want to welcome Chris. Good to have you with us today.
Great to be with you again, Dr. Paul. Thank you.
Have you found any myths out there? Anything that we need that needs a little correction, or are we on the right track on all the issues of the day?
Unfortunately, there's more myths than we can handle. So we'll start with Europe. And secession is actually in the air in Europe. And a lot of it has to do with Europe's foreign policy, or perhaps lack of foreign policy. As Russia's Vladimir Putin recently pointed out, Europe has no foreign policy. It just follows whatever the United States, whatever tune the United States is playing. And as a result, the results have been horrible. Europe is suffering an influx from the wars that it supported and was a part of in the Middle East. There are financial problems in Greece and in other European nations. And Britain may wave goodbye to the great European experiment. There is a secession vote coming up, and it may be this year or next. And as usual, whenever there's any type of decentralization, the Chicken Littles come out and talk about how the earth will stop spinning if Britain was ever to do such a thing as secede. So please talk about the setup over there in Europe and what the real story is on this British secession.
Well, I find this really fascinating because they don't call it secession, they're voting to get out. But I call it secession, and I call it great. And the principle is so important because this is the principle that all the states endorsed at the time of the founding of this country. They were joining the Union, but they never thought for a minute that it was absolutely permanent and they could never back out of it if they wanted to. And that attitude lasted for a long, long time, and it was totally disposed of, with the Civil War. So, but nobody's questioning whether or not the British have a right to get out of the European Union. That isn't the question. The big argument is whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Well, I like secession. I like smaller government. I always believed that the European Union was not feasible. I think there should be voluntary unions. People come together because of free trade and sound money and international commodity money. That would be one thing, but that's not what they're doing. They want a political unification. Now, the one leader that we have in Britain is Nigel Farage, who's a member of the Independent Party as well. He's a member of the European Parliament. And he's been pushing this, and we've interviewed him on our program, but it looks like the referendum might come up this year, but probably not because Cameron doesn't want it. He's part of the international status position. And also, if not, the pressure should come at least in 17, but who knows, with the turmoil in Europe today, with the problems coming from the absence of a foreign policy and this artificialness of the European Union, the economic crisis and the migration of people coming from as a reflection of the foreign policy of the leaders of Great Britain and France, the United States, and other countries in the Middle East, which is now engulfing Europe. It's a financial problem, and it's also a social problem. It's a law and order problem. So there's every reason in the world for the people of Britain to change their mind, because they generally have supported the European Union, but they still have the British pound. They never went over to the euro. So this to me is very important. It's important on what's going on now, but to me the most important thing is to emphasize that people should have a right to leave. And and it's assumed that they do. Unfortunately, we have lost that right. And, even if you're for keeping our union together or the European Union together, the fact that somebody can leave puts restraints on a strong central government, because they will say, well, you're rocking the boat. Why do you guys want to leave? You know, someday maybe Texas might want to leave the Union. Well, why does Texas want to leave? Well, they might argue, well, you don't have enough freedom, and Texans want more freedom. So maybe that would put pressure on the national governments. So you don't have to say, well, let's break up a union and let's all secede, because you know, just the threat of secession and the right of secession is something that will restrain the growth of large central government.
Yes, and large central government is something that we live under here in the United States, and many Americans are upset themselves. In fact, just this week or last week, a major poll came out that says 75% of Americans now view the United States government as a breeding ground of corruption. Now, interestingly enough, or I should say oddly enough, Donald Trump's candidacy is viewed largely as pushback or revenge for this corruption. So let's talk about corruption, Dr. Paul. Ordinary corruption versus the giant welfare state, warfare state corruption that many Americans vote for, support, and please clear it up, the difference between the two.
Yeah, I think this is very good and very healthy, and there has been a shift in attitude. Nearly that same percentage of people who don't trust the government, and they're very leery of our federal government. I think that's very good, because it deserves that type of attitude, and maybe that will prompt positive changes. But the idea of corruption, there's two kinds of corruptions. There's moral corruption. Take, for instance, I consider the system of money we have today as immoral and corrupt and serves special interests, and that is the fact that the Federal Reserve, in secret, can dictate economic policy of fixing interest rates to the benefit of one group at the expense of the other. For instance, if you're in the banking business, easy money is a good deal. If you're in the military-industrial complex or in politics, easy money is a good deal. But who gets cheated? The people who want to save money are trying to take care of themselves, and they get nothing for their savings. And that is corruption. But nobody, that's not what they're talking about. That's not what the average person say that's corrupt. They think of corruption as people who are literally stealing and breaking the law, and they're benefiting. You know, they promise deals for somebody, but it's sort of money under the table. And there is that type of corruption. But you know, since I've been in and out of Washington, the people I met, I would say that they're not corrupt in the illegal sense. They're not taking stuff under the table. They're getting some indirect and future benefits, but most of the corruption, there's not that much of that type of corruption. The real corruption comes from the fact that very few people in Washington ever read the law by Bastiat. The government should not ever be doing anything that you and I can't do. So if government is involved in printing money, we're not allowed to do it. It's counterfeiting. But if you let the government do it, that's immoral. So if you want to transfer wealth, if you want to help people because there's poverty in the world and people are going hungry, you know, we all can be compassionate and argue the case that freedom and property rights and free markets and sound money will take care of that problem the best way possible. But if you say, well, we endorse the fact that you should tax those who have been successful and take from them and give to somebody else, that's theft. But this is not the type of corruption I think most people are thinking about when they're talking about the government is too corrupt. And of course, I think there's more of the corruption which is literal and illegal, that goes on as well. But I think our bigger problem is the corruption in political philosophy, economic misunderstanding, and how it benefits so many. It's very corrupt how the military industrial complex makes war profits, you know, and takes jobs away from people and causes inflation and causes medical care to go up. But that is not, you know, the socialist this progressive Democrats is all against corruption, but they're not against welfare redistribution. You know, they're all for that. They want more of that. But I would say the warfare state is based on a very, very corrupt idea of way too much power given to the politicians, who then are always fighting over the power. The real tragedy we face is that this issue is not distinguished from one party to another, because both parties endorse this corrupt political economic system, and I think everybody on the surface, anybody with common sense and decency, would be opposed to people literally stealing money or taking bribes and that sort of thing. But the big thing is the corruption in big government in itself.
Okay, next we're going to cover a myth that festers largely on the left and in the Democratic side of the debate, and it has to do with the difference between real wealth and crony wealth. A lot of Democrats, they lump them together. There's no difference between Apple's Steve Jobs versus, let's say, Goldman Sachs' CEO. It's all just wealth that's there for the taking. And Bernie Sanders, presidential candidate on the Democratic side, he capitalizes on this myth largely. And I'll read one of his recent quotes. He says, "There's something profoundly wrong when the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Now, what's he missing there, Dr. Paul?
Concept of sound money and free markets, because that is an imbalance. You know, in a free market, there's going to be a lot more wealthy people, and it's going to be better distributed. But he's just lumping wealth as the problem, because they think that there should be equality of wealth and that they should take it from one and give it to another. And he's all for taxing this wealth. So if you have Steve Jobs, who has done well, did well, and he produces jobs, and he produces the jobs that are necessary. But this is pure democracy. People made Steve Jobs wealthy because they bought his product. It was a good product, and that is a true vote of democracy. But if somebody is rich because they can use eminent domain and get easy loans from the banks and get bailouts, and they're in the military-industrial complex and they're wealthy, I agree with Bernie Sanders, but he won't distinguish between the two. And right now there's a tremendous amount of wealth because of this system and because of the monetary system, that wealth gravitates to the very wealthy and the poor are punished. And this is what we're seeing. Austrian economics and Mises always taught that, you know, if you continue with an inflationary system and systematically destroy the value of a currency, you'll wipe out the middle class. So with all this effort of the liberals and the socialists say, we got to take care of the poor and help people who ever need anything, what they're doing is inadvertently destroying the middle class. And then they come along and they say, there's too many wealthy people. What we have is we haven't taxed people enough. We have to continue to redistribute wealth by force, rather than trying to understand exactly the difference between earned wealth and wealth that has been gained through an economic system or through privilege or through contracts with the government. That makes a big difference. You know, we have the military-industrial complex, we have the drug-industrial complex, we have the educational-industrial complex. It's on, and corporations do benefit. So there's much in the language that we can agree with the progressives and people like Sanders, but he needs to get another course in free market economics and property rights.
Yes, next we'll go from the left to the right and to the neocons who dominate the ideas of foreign policy for way too long. And one of their common tactics is to portray the United States as this good shepherd that oversees the world, minding its own business, and out of nowhere, the bad guys come and attack. And as a result, the U.S. is dragged, they like to use the word dragged, into yet another war. We'll use John Bolton, a quote from John Bolton. He's a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And this is how he likes to portray the way he sees it. He says, "Our actions did not cause radical Islamists to hate us. We cannot remain crouched in a fetal position, hoping not to offend anyone or respond to terrorism's global reality only after we are attacked. In the war we are in, not of our choosing, but because we are being attacked, the only long-term strategy is to destroy the enemy, not to appease it. What do you think, Dr. Paul?
He's a joke. That's what I think. Because when you think about it, we're the ones that have gone 6, 8, 10,000 miles around the world. We're in 150 countries. We've started or participated in many, many wars, minor wars that turned into big wars because we go in and pick the dictators. No, this whole idea that we're responding to an attack is just absolutely wrong. And he does this deliberately because he is a dedicated neoconservative who believes that American exceptionalism is the only answer to the world, and yet it's the cause of so much of our problem. It's humanitarianism with a guillotine, as Isabel Patterson described it. Yes, we go with humanitarian beliefs and how much good we're going to do, but we usually carry, guns and bombs and threats and intimidation. So that goes on. But it does remind me of one little episode prior to the time we voted in the committee about going to war against Iraq, because I said, Iraq has not committed aggression against us. What are we doing this for? We should not do this. And one of the other members got up and he put me down. He said, Dr. Paul, you don't know what you're talking about. He says, they have committed aggression against us. They're actually shooting at our airplanes as we fly over their country and we're bombing them. That's their definition of aggression, that we can do anything we want. In any opposition, it is considered aggression against our policy. We have a long way to go to get that understanding out there because the media essentially endorses the neocon position.
Right. Let's end, Dr. Paul, with Hillary Clinton. One common thread that we see throughout our lives is government is always there to help. And after they help, they have to help fix the mess that they created, and on and on and on. They're always fixing the prior mess. One of the most popular these days to talk about is the student loans. Government was trying to help students get into college for a reasonable amount of money. As a result, they drove up prices, and now students are saddled with this debt. Hillary Clinton, in her drive to further help and create and to fix the previous problem of government loans, says it's a disgrace that government is making money off of lending to college students. We need to end that. What do you say, Dr. Paul?
Well, I think she needs a lesson in economics also, because where does she get the money to make the loans? It comes out of the Federal Reserve and out of debt. And the idea, and of course it's done through the banking system that makes profits, and they're guaranteed and they're backed up. The federal government should be out of the education business, but it absolutely doesn't do any good. To say that the government has no right to make any money, well, they have no right to be involved in education, because it does. It boosts up the cost of education. It also produces an educational system that is inferior. It's harder for people to get jobs. And if she wants to protect the students, protect them, not talking them into taking these huge loans, but making sure that they understand that ultimately debt that is passed on, let's say they get exempt from paying these loans back, which they will, ultimately it's destructive because it causes inflation. The current generation, as they go out in the world, they're still going to be penalized for that, and there's not going to be the jobs out there. So she is very mixed up on that, and this is hardly is the problem that the government's making profits off of student loans. That gets to be a little bit silly. But Chris, I think we have to go now. And once again, I want to thank you for helping us out here on Mythbusters.
Always a pleasure, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. And I want to address the listening audience and just say thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the program. And please come back soon.